Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next session on the Family Business Journey this week as part of our Family Business Summit for 2020. Delighted this morning to be joined by Jacqui Jackson from the beautiful part of the UK in Cumbria, who is going to take us through a session on next generation and some of the learnings that actually the next generation have gained this year during the pandemic, but actually how they apply in practice. So good morning, Jacqui.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to come onto this panel today. My background, we're a fifth generation family business, and I'm the fourth of the fifth generation. We are a family business and a business family. And what I mean by that is I have one son that runs within our family business. We've moved from grocers to retailers to convenience retailing and now to co-working and consulting. And the other part of the business, my other son, who established coffee roasting, donuts, and cafes. We're all in the space market at the moment, which is a tricky place to be in certainly the last 6 or 7 months. So we're about physical space, where we have physical co-workers coming into a physical space, and we have cafes, which nobody really wants to be in that sector anymore. So how does that pivot and change out? So we've got some interesting insight into what we've done ourselves and what we've learned this year as a consequence of this change. I also work as a non-exec director with a transitioning mid-sized food manufacturer and how they've reacted and responded to COVID. So they're just transitioning, over the last 18 months into fourth generation. So we have that next generation coming in and taking the leadership role, and an exiting generation that are handing over the reins. And we all hand over in different ways. So I'm in the process of handing over. I've learned a lot in this handover from a pandemic point of view. And I think that would be interesting to hear from the people out there as to how they're feeling that this change, this pandemic has leveled a family business. Because it's really interesting as we're working with our family in a family business, we're in very close proximity. And it's really challenging to operate a business and stay as a family when we're all in this together. And how do we form the bubble in order to keep parts of that organisation going without it falling down? Some really interesting stuff happening. We've learned a lot. I'm also an ambassador for productivity with Be the Business in the UK. Now this is looking at pre-COVID, was looking at why is the UK falling behind in terms of its productivity against all of its competitors, really. Why are we not adopting technology in the same way? Is that something to do with our attitude to it or need to use technology? But then what's the pandemic has created is the biggest adoption of technology in a lifetime. So we've done it because we've had to do it. So why don't we do it anyway? So there's all sorts of questions around this. Is this a generational thing? Is this an attitude thing? How are family businesses responding to this adoption of technology? If we're seen from the outside world to be a little slow and a little risk averse, well, are we? Or are we actually quite smart at our investments and the way we approach things? So there's so many questions, I suppose, that it's brought up for me. So I'd like to ask if people would like to use the chat of how many of you in the audience are next gens at the moment? Do we know?
I think there are at least 3 next gen in the room, Jacqui, and I've got questions on my piece of paper for the 3 that dropped out this morning that can't be here, so I've got some questions for you too. Could you just start actually by just backtracking slightly and just give a little bit, what do you mean by next generation? Because there's such a lot of conversation around next gen, and it's kind of almost that some people go down the 1830 holiday route, and others, next gen. I was with a 63-year-old earlier this year he said, until my mother dies, I will always be the next gen, and it's her business until that day. So what is your definition of a next generation?
Well, the next generation is coming in to take that leadership role of the business, for me. But then there's so much complexity in next generation. There's next generation that actually doesn't want to lead the business. They might want to own the business, and have nothing to do with the operation of it, or they might want to work in a very low level, just be within the family and the family business and be part of it. But they all have voice and influence. So I think it's a very broad church. If you're a family member that's involved within the business at whatever level, then you are the next generation and you have voice and influence. Or you might not feel that you have voice. If you've come in as the cleaner or the gardener or the maintenance guy, actually you have voice, opinion, and can sway and influence decision making. So it's not a positional power, it's about being part of that family business complexity that adds that voice mechanisms to it. I've got a slide of the 3-circle model and some interpretation of that, but I thought actually it'd be interesting to talk about certainly what we know from Be the Business's point of view. They did a piece of research around this productivity agenda over the last 7 months, and it kind of put us all into a third. So in our response to COVID and the pandemic, we have a third of businesses that would be classed as the innovators, those that have already pivoted, already changed. Now, to a certain extent, we have, in that we have a physical space community, so we've made it a virtual space community that we didn't really think we needed to do, but actually we did. So we have this virtual space as well as a physical space operation. Our coffee roasting side have moved entirely away from their sit-in cafes to be complete takeaway operation, and now are establishing drive-through operations, which were already in the plan, but have been accelerated. So that plan's been accelerated. So that's next generation. So we have discussions from our family business where we have 2 generations actively involved in the business. What I've found is this has been a great leveler of decision making, because there is no one person with the answer, because nobody has experienced the set of circumstances that surround us now. Nobody alive has experienced this particular set of circumstances. So actually, therefore, power doesn't reside in one person or one person's opinion anymore, because they don't know. They haven't lived it and they can't say they have. They haven't. So that for us has leveled conversations and decision making, where no idea is a crazy idea anymore. Let's plot through any idea to change, because they're not stupid. Who do we collaborate with? Why would we do that? How can we do that in a different way and enable new ideas and new thinking to come through? So that's what we found, and that's what would be interesting to hear from other family businesses. Is really what they've done, and whether they feel in that same way. The resilience comes from everybody having almost an equality in the family, that you can therefore influence the change that you believe to be right, as long as you can justify why that's happened. So you've got the third of these businesses that have innovated. Their risk factor is that the world won't change. It hasn't changed, and the pivot hasn't worked, or the way you've invested in order to pivot to change hasn't worked, because the world is going to go back, or the behaviours of consumers are going to go back to the way they were. So you've got a risk factor in there. So we're always balancing risk in business. So that's our balance there. A third would be classed as the stickers. Those that firmly believe that the world will go back to the way it was. We've just got to wait it out. And as long as we've got cash reserves to do it, we'll wait and it will return. So the consumer won't change, business won't change, nothing will really fracture too much. It's just a blip. It's a bit bumpy, but it will return. So the risk for those guys is that the world does change, and it changes phenomenally, and they hemorrhage cash, and they're out because they haven't changed. But they could be right, because none of us know the answer to this, because none of us have seen it before. So we're all trying to balance risks. And then we've got the undecided. A third of businesses are fundamentally undecided yet, because they're still watching what's happening. And I know from my own point of view of running our business, it's like tectonic plates. We're stepping into quicksand, whichever direction we go. And we're looking for some solid ground, so that we can make a clearer decision based on a bit of solid ground. But it keeps moving. Every day it keeps moving. Sometimes every hour it's moving. So how do we make those decisions when it keeps moving? But we're getting clearer on the path, even though it's not the best path forward, but we're getting clearer that it's going to be very, very bumpy, certainly for us. So there's the undecided camp. Again, their risk is that they hemorrhage cash in waiting. that they're not clear on deciding. There is a point of view that I've heard many times of this leaders step up. This is the opportunity for leaders to really step up here and make decisions and be clear and be strong and say, we're going this way, come with me. And they could be right. So there's something about leaders and next generation and existing generation that think, right, who should lead this company now? Who's got that right set of tools and behaviours and attitude to take us through this bumpy period? And it might be somebody that hasn't been there before, but actually it could either be the safe pair of hands, or it could be the entrepreneurial maverick that comes up with these crazy ideas all the time that all of a sudden that might actually work. Do we let that one through? So we've got to be able to evaluate this, and voices within family firms have got to be able to air that voice and to be able to confidently say, this is where I'm going, this is how I'm doing it, and this is why it'll work. This is why it's going to work, even though none of us really know. So it's really interesting to see that the business I work with as a non-exec have been incredibly busy. They have been the busiest they've ever been through COVID, because they've been in the right supply chain at the right moment in time. But they've obviously done the right things in order to be in that right supply chain at the right time. So they went into critical supply chain. So that's a great boon for them. But their challenges have been, we've got to get workforce to work safely in this. We've got to keep people alive and do everything we can. The huge responsibility there on your workforce and your people is enormous and cannot be underestimated. So whichever way you go, and it's how next generations of families actually are responding in a very open way in coming up with solutions in how they tackle it. So it's kind of, therefore in family firms, it's kind of where does your influence come from, and how can you be that leader that steps up? So I'll just show you this next one. That's the one about your risk factors on this third. And it'd be interesting if businesses can decide where they fit in there. We have ourselves elements of, we've definitely done some innovation, we've definitely changed, we've definitely moved and pivoted to be much more innovative than we probably would have been. We're definitely not the sticker, but we've never been the sticker before. On some elements of the business, we're still probably undecided, where we need actually different physical space, and who's going to invest in physical space at the moment, because nobody wants to be inside a space, but how long will that last? So we have elements of our business where we're a little bit undecided, but we're definitely towards more of the innovation side and hoping that that will work. So it'd be interesting from the audience to decide where they fit and justify why, and then almost family discussions that say, this is the way we should go and why. Then there's this one, the classic 3-circle model that anybody in the family business will have seen. But I use this one, and get everybody that comes into a family business to plot where everybody is in the complexity of their family, because this is where the influence lies in family businesses. The voices that can either enable or stop a decision being made are often very disparate and don't follow the hierarchies. So if I'm chief executive, in theory of the family business, I should have all the decision-making rights. But in family firms, you don't. It might be Great Aunt Maud that lives in Canada that just has the ear of somebody else that creates the ripple and the waves. So they have no positional power. They don't even have a share in the family business, but they have a voice and an influence within the family business. So I would recommend everybody has a go at this. So if you're in the next generation, print this out, get some Post-it notes, or write on it. Who owns this business? Is there an external investor in there that owns it? Who are those external managers and staff that are not owners that might have voice or influence? And you plot all of the names and you put them on there, and you start deciding, who do I need to influence myself as a next generation? Who's going to enable me or back my decisions or follow my belief that can unlock different decisions in this complex family business model. So that's a really great tool if you use it very practically. Instead of it being a bit of an academic, nice 3 circles piece, it's actually a tool to help you decide the influences in your own family business. Then there's this one. This one is, I don't know if anybody's ever seen this before, but there's a family business learning cycle. Mm. So as any next generation coming in, you've got to know the basics of business. If you want to operate a business or operate in business or own a family business, then you really need to understand the basics of what a family business is, or what a business is and how it operates. You know, HR policies, basic finance and accounting measures, and profit and return, and all of those elements of business that make you think with a business mindset. The other element is around the values of the business. Now, the values of any family business, regardless of generation, should align, because the values are those things that we won't compromise on. We won't change, we won't adapt, we won't flex. The values are just held as our belief system and as our constant thread. So we've got to know what they are, and we've also got to know what they mean to us as individuals. It's almost like a sense check. What does that value mean? It's not just a word. It's got to be a living, breathing thing. Then the big elements were always that totally can undermine whether a family business is successful or otherwise, is about learning to lead that business if you want to. If you want to be the leader in that business, then you have to learn to lead it. And you have to be able to make those decisions. And at this point in a pandemic, depending on how you've been impacted in your own supply chain, then it's, how should I be leading this? What are those behaviours that are required now for my business to get me out of the situation I'm in, or to, if I'm in a really big growth phase, how do I lead this and get teams in quite quickly with the right skill set to get me to that next stage of growth? So it depends how you've been impacted through this chain. And then, of course, there's the learning to let go piece. Oh my gosh, this is hard, because I'm in the let go piece at the moment. And that is difficult, I must admit. I've talked about this for years, and now I'm doing it. It's really quite hard. It's a challenge to let go, where you have been in control of something for many years, and you're letting go of pieces of that, and actually actively allowing new thinking, new ideas, new ways of doing things to come through that you might not quite get, that you might not quite think that they will work. So that letting go piece is valuable. And those two pieces, the learning to lead and the learning to let go, if family firms don't get that right, it's catastrophic to the business plan. So that's when that needs a bit of focus for next gens. This one, I think, it would be a great tool for next gens to have a go at. Now, this is actually the value proposition, which comes from Strategizer. And it's actually a great way. It's designed for you to look at your customers. So your external customers, and you'd say, what are my customers' jobs? So on the circle side of this, over here, you start on this circle side, and you would put your customer in there, that customer that you're after. Now, if you treat you as the customer within your own business, if you're a next gen, you put you in there. I'm an internal customer of my business. So how do I want to do that? My mouse has gone funny. Right. So I'm the internal customer. What are the jobs I have to do every day or every week in order to learn to lead this business or take the reins of this business? Then you'd say, what are my pain points? What are the things that are causing me friction or getting in my way that could be smoothed out that would enable me to take this leadership role? And then you'd say, right, okay, what would be the real gains here? If I could get that to work, that would be an absolute gain for me as an internal customer, as an internal next generation member of my business. Then you'd go over to this side, which is actually what the business currently offers me as a next generation coming in. What does this business offer me? So these would be the products and services in this triangle here, that you'd list all of the things that are in theory there to help me learn to lead this business. What are all those products? And you'd list them all. And then you'd say, which ones of those products or services are actually I think, as a business, relieving pain points for my next generation members, and which things do I think are creating gain for my next generation members. And then you'd map them across. Do these gains that I believe as a business we offer to our next generation coming in actually delivering gain for you? Or actually, are they relieving pain points or friction points for you? And if they don't, then you're kidding yourself. Then you need to fix this bit. You need to fix your offer. But so it would be really interesting if some next generations would have a go at using this tool, which is designed for external customers. When you're looking at your customers and how you really meet their needs, do it internally as I'm the customer of this business and I need to learn to lead it. What do I really need? What's getting in my way? And therefore, what am I going to fix over here that says, I'm going to learn this better? So they're just useful tools to play with. But what you're doing there is creating focus on what you actually need. What's actually causing you friction points? And we might say, actually, I'm doing all of these jobs and my pain points are, nobody's listening to me, I'm not getting any traction, I'm getting patted on the head or getting a bit patronised, nobody's listening, so what am I going to do about that? What would a real gain to me be? People start listening. I've got a voice mechanism, I've got a route to get decisions through. What would that be? Then you'd have to come up with, in these products and services in a family firm, well, what are family businesses actively doing to enable the next generation to be the best leaders? Or are they just expecting you to know how to do it? Or are we actively doing something that helps you become the best leader of the business proactively? So I think it's a useful tool for a next generation to do, and then almost present it to the family to say, so you've really thought it through, rather than it being anecdotal or a response to something that's happened or a flash, that you're getting a hold of a plan that says, this is what would help us become the best leaders we can be of this business. And this is what we need to enable. And because of actually what I've learned over the last 6-7 months of a pandemic, is this is the biggest opportunity to let change through. There will never be, I don't think, another better opportunity, because everything is a bit shaken and a little bit broken. And in shake and break, opportunity rears its head and you either seize it or you don't. So these are tools, I think, that would help you quite quickly come up with your own plan and your own solutions that gets the ideas from your head. So I'd really have a go at using that. Then there's things like, this is a traditional one that people might not have seen. If you have a next generation that, I want to say needs to lead, but actually needs to hand over some of the reins, then there's something about these descriptors of families, of leaders that are exiting. So you've got the sovereign. They've got an immensely strong link to a business, and they're usually forced out by old age or family conspiracy moves them out. So that's the type, and you can identify with that or not. I didn't experience this one myself, and I'm 4th generation. Then there's the general, very like the sovereign, except when they say they'll go, they keep coming back. Yeah. Come across that one. The ambassador, a diplomat who realises the time is up but remains available as a mentor or a hands-off chairman. Now, that's the one I would like to be, but you'd have to ask my 2 sons if I am that one. My father was definitely that one, so I was lucky that's what my experience was, is that they were there to mentor, there to listen, and actually just hand it over. So I was quite fortunate. And I talked to many other family businesses that are not as fortunate, because they've got other types of leaders that literally won't let go. And I'm hoping I'm not going to be one of those, but I might be just on the edge. And then you've got the governor, recognises that their time is up, and goes to do something else. So they've gone, they're out, and I'm quite happy with that, and it's all been planned in. And then you've got the hedonist, has worked like a slave for 40 years and goes off to sail the world, often without notice. That literally gets to whatever that retirement age which was set, and hands over the keys on that day and doesn't look back, regardless of the circumstances. Just goes, I'm out. That's me. I'm finished. I've done my bit. So you get different approaches. And I think that depends on whether you were forced to join the family business or whether you actively decided to join the family business. And my father had to join the family business, and he wanted to follow a career doing something entirely different. But because of a set of circumstances, his father became ill. He had to join the family firm as the only son, the only child. So he had to. So he was always somebody that didn't love it, but did it very well. But fundamentally didn't feel he'd achieved what he would have wanted to achieve, which was to be an accountant. Whether he would have been a great accountant or not, I don't know. But he was great on the numbers in the business as a consequence. So the talent wasn't wasted, but you've always got a challenge in there where you're really choosing to join a family business, whether you really want to be there and what value will you add to that business. Or is it that I've got nowhere else to go and I'm not sure what to do, I'll just join it? Or is it I've got a burning ambition to change it, to move it in a different direction, to start a seed part of that business, to, you know, sort of take a small investment pot and create something different. So, and that's where we've become a business family, is that we believe that you enable people to follow what they want to do. And how you can use the family assets to help do that, to help enable that, rather than force people into, this is the way we do things, this is the way we've always done things, and this is what you're going to do. So they're very different approaches. And it's working out for you as a next generation, especially now that this last 7 months have created such an opportunity for change, where more of the old isn't applicable in many circumstances. So what do we do to see the gap, see the opportunity, and drive what we want to do and what we want to achieve as the next generation coming through? So that's what I would suggest everybody has a go at. So I'll just stop sharing that at the moment and then see if we've got any questions or comments.
Jacqui, that was brilliant, actually. I love the models. And I think what I loved most is actually you applying them to the next gen, but you could almost apply them to the older generation and get the two to do the mapping and then bring them together and see where the differences are.
That would be ideal. That would be absolutely ideal if you could get them to do that. And it wouldn't take them very long, actually. And if they actually did it at the same time, from a business's point of view, and they use the square box of this is what we believe we offer to next generation coming in, and then next generation just do the circle box, and then you bring them together and see if there is a disparity between the two, and then you get solutions.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I think you brought up, for me, lots of different questions that they're not in any order now, Jacqui, because I kind of scattergun, but I think you just talked about the next generation, how they need to follow the dream, and whether it's using the assets of the business to create an entrepreneurial venture they can then do or not. But I think I speak to lots of next gen that have got involved for all the wrong reasons, and ultimately down the line there's that just not happiness in terms of fulfillment later on in terms of life. And I think, do you not think there's a bigger challenge this year because of the fact that people are now losing their jobs through the pandemic? So the easy option might be for a next gen to say, actually, there is a place in the business, I'm going to work in the family firm. So it's
I think and I think that's sad, because it's not going to add that energy to the business. And I suppose it is tricky as a family, because if you're the parents, actually you want to treat all of your children equally, and you want to give them the opportunities. And it is very hard to say, actually, you've got to come in with a business plan, and you've got to be proactive, and you've got to do this, that, and the other. There's a toughness required there.
Yeah.
But then there's something fundamental of, we've got business, so the business has to be successful in order for everybody to benefit from that business. And as families get bigger and bigger and bigger, the business has to feed them all. So the business has to grow. And a lot of them have been impacted quite massively. It depends on which part of the supply chain you're in at the moment in the UK or in the world. Then how do we fix that? So you've almost got to drive the next generation to come in with a clear plan. Why are they the best candidate to be in this business? And it's really, they've got to be supersonic compared to the other great candidates that would be out there. And there's a toughness required in the current generation to say, justify your position and why you believe that you're the best for this business or for that role within the business.
Yeah, it's a bit like I've been quoting Jim Collins a lot recently in terms of his analogy with being on the bus, and it's not just about being on that family business bus, it's about having the best person in the right seat to drive that business forward. And it may not be a family member, so you're right, you have to compete with the global audience of population that could do that role and prove yourself, I think, which is coming through. Do you think the pandemic and the issues of 2020 has given more of a voice to the next generation?
Yes. Oh yeah, this is a big opportunity for that next generation to come through with their thinking, their ideas, their future. What does it look like for them now? And really enable it. And I think any existing generation of my age or older really needs to start listening. You really, really need to listen, because none of us know the answer at this stage. So then I really see it as a huge levelling of all the businesses that I've talked to in family firms at the moment. There is a real levelling of opinion based on our own skill sets. So we're embracing our skill sets and taking this problem, this gigantic, wicked problem that is a pandemic, and saying, this is how we think we can get around this. And everybody needs to listen, and leaders do need to step up. This is the opportunity to step up and say, I know this will work. I have thought long and hard about it. I've got the numbers. We might not quite know that these numbers will pan through, but I believe that this is the right direction. And it might be a bit bumpy, and it is going to be a bit bumpy. Let's accept the brutal facts of the way we are now and balance that with optimism and realism that moves us forward. So I think that's the point where anybody can step into this and say, this is the best way forward. I believe this works. Come with me, because that's what it's about. Leading isn't an authority thing. Leading is a belief thing. And you inspire confidence as a consequence. That's what leaders do.
Yeah, and I'd echo the optimism that's out there in terms of the business. A lot of businesses are struggling and suffering, and we know that. But actually, there is still a lot of optimism in terms of people taking advantage of the opportunity. I think the other thing I've seen this year is actually it's given businesses time to do that strategic piece where they always talk about not having enough time to kind of think about and focus on the business, but being in it. And I think we've all been forced over a very short period of time to stop, take pause, and reflect, and then focus. And I think that there's opportunity there for the next gen as well, because they have different skills in many cases. They're a lot more social media really enabled and digitally enabled, so they can bring those skills. And the digital agenda is growing for all businesses, isn't it? So there's opportunity to have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. That digital piece and the technology piece, we've had over the last 3 months the biggest increase in adoption of technology and digital platforms than we've ever had in the UK. So it's been an absolute massive shake-up. And for me, at the beginning of this pandemic, this was always about the opportunity to change, was the opportunity to not bring back what wasn't working, to not do more of the same if it was causing you pain and no gain. Then it's your biggest opportunity to shake it out. Keeping going with the way it was, if it didn't work, if it was wonderful and lovely, then I get you. But wherever there was a friction point or a pain point in a business, then this is your biggest opportunity to let that go and change. But then I'm kind of on the optimistic side of a personality spectrum. I like change and I love it, and I get though that other people don't. For them, it makes them very nervous, very fearful. So it's, if you had a fearful generation in a business and you were on that optimistic side, then it's learning to allay the fears of the fearful.
Yeah, it's taking them on the journey, isn't it? You all have to be on the same journey. So it kind of goes back to what you're saying about shared purpose and values and vision and moving collectively, irrespective of your...
Yeah. And I think that's it with generational family businesses, is that they have a long-term view. They are about that long-term and always have been. So it's really almost revisiting that purpose. What are we in business for? And revisiting that and really looking at it right now, and then saying, well, how can we deliver that? And it might be in a different way. Our purpose is still the same, but how we deliver is different now, potentially. So how do we do the different? How do we enable the different to get us to that purpose now? And that's what I think should happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, because I spoke to Ian Sterling, who's our generation. He's in his 50s, from Arbicki yesterday. He's the fourth generation of his, working with his three brothers, or two brothers and a sister, to drive a business forward. It's a farming business that goes back to the 1700s. But actually, he said, we've been through lots of change, but in the last 6 years, they've invested in a new distillery, and they're now making whiskey, vodka and gin. And he said his mother's in her 80s. She walks around the new distillery they're building, and she sort of spots things and has an influence over what they're doing. She has no authority in terms of ownership, in terms of making those decisions, but she's influencing. But again, they're also listening to the next generation who's saying, well, actually, we could do this differently. So they're bringing 3 generations into the conversation, but it's all with a common goal, and they're working together. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes gets lost in family firms, is you forget what that common goal is, and you can get lost in sibling rivalries and all sorts of different conflicts in different generations, different family members, and all of that kind of thing. But that's why you've really got to hold your purpose. What is it that we're in business to do and achieve? Way off in the distance, what's that big, hairy, audacious goal that we are going for, that we're going to change, and keeping sight of that? And it's almost now, it's a great opportunity to revisit that, because the way you get to it will probably be different, which is the joy. But it's almost taking that pause point, instead of being dragged along in all sorts of things, is we as business owners probably want to take control of what we can control. So it's trying to get some of that control back, where we're being, maybe feel like we're being dragged along a little bit. It's being much more purposeful about it, deliberate, I think.
Yeah, I think the other thing I've been listening to a lot of people, I mean, I've seen some statistics that say 100,000 family firms in the UK are going to transition in the next 2 to 3 years. So transition from one generation, however that happens, is going to happen. And a question that's coming from the floor is along these lines, because obviously in order for a business to transition successfully, the greater chance of success is when it's communicated and planned properly, and it's not caused by a sad event, be it incapacity of a leader or the death of a parent. So there's that emotional connection. But the question that's come in really is, how do these conversations start, and what's the best way for them to start? And is it often left until the conversation about wills and mortality and stepping back, and the older generation planning their stepping back? Is that one of the enablers for the conversations you see most of? Or what are the enablers that you see?
The enabler, I suppose, for that conversation to happen has to be a proactive way forward. It's awful actually when it's a pandemic or an illness or something else that's happened in the family, where all of a sudden we've got to decide. And businesses need to decide. Any business needs to decide on its progression and its succession. You know, giant large organisations that are not family held have lots and lots of practices on how they create succession, so there's no gaps in their delivery, because they're completely focused on what the business does and how it does it and how it improves what it does. And family firms need to be that kind of proactive, focused on the customer and the consumer out there first, and then whatever the business does has to not interrupt what the customer is wanting, needing or requiring. So they've got to be much more proactive in, how do we ensure we're not going to interrupt ourselves? So we'd have a business plan in place. Pandemics shake that up a bit and accelerate that decision making, but you have to have these conversations. And in families, it's because of that family barrier, we don't have those conversations, because we don't want to upset anybody in the family. And I think the best way is probably to bring in somebody from outside of the family that can enable that conversation to happen, to start to take place, where it's not confrontational, or you're not going to upset anybody. They're going to ask the questions that need to be asked. Well, what kind of planning have you got in place for this succession handover, and what do you need to do? How would you form that plan? How would you improve things? Because it's part of your continuous improvement within a business, of improving the way the business moves forward. And if it's interrupted by the leadership by a bad transition,
Mm.
well, we could lose fabulous businesses because we failed to plan on that part. And that's devastating. It's devastating for the UK economy if that happens. As you say, there are thousands and millions handing over at this point, this aging generation. And of course, I think a lot through the pandemic, the older generation have said, okay, I'm out. That's me. I've done my bit. I think I need to hand this across now because I'm really not sure which way this is going. So this is an opportunity to really get some good thinking in there. And somebody asking you insightful questions as a collective family is well worth it than you trying to enable the conversation yourself. I would invest in somebody coming in for a couple of hours that asks you those questions that need to be asked, that starts unlocking the conversations that we're all a bit frightened to have.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. I also think this year, because of what's happened, I think it's forced people to have more of those conversations. And those conversations, they're almost becoming the norm because the business is on a cliff. Some of the businesses now are on cliff edges, and it's like we either collectively come together and share our aims and our abilities and drive this and make it work, or it's not going to be here in the long term. And I think two things I've heard this week. One was from the chairman of a 200-year-old plus family firm in Scotland, and she was like, we have to put the business first, because without the business, there's no business for the family. But actually, more importantly, what she said was the moment she took over the role as chairman, they started the succession process again in terms of who would be the next chairman. So they're continually planning for the involvement of the next generation, but not just at family roles and as CEO and the chairman, but at all strategic parts of their business. So I think there's an opportunity there for family firms. And do you... Your diagram you put up in terms of looking at some of the enablers, what do you see as the best ways for a family firm to create structure? What structures are there or tools are there to enable the stepping up of the next generation? So you said there were some gains that could be had if this was done, and how you educate. What sort of things have you seen that can make a big difference?
I think for next generations, and it depends on if it's a single next generation coming in, or it might be brothers and sisters or cousins that are coming in, is trying to get them aligned. Because I'm not saying in next generations, there is often quite a lot of bravado, in that everybody believes that they can rule the world quite quickly without needing to learn along the way, that they feel fully equipped. You know, I've got two sons in the millennial age group that can think, well, I'm classic entrepreneur, I'm just going to do it. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly how I'm going to do it. But then they don't, because they need to learn that next bit, and they need to be open to learning. This way of thinking about, I need to learn from somewhere, is to go out and seek knowledge and seek information, but seek it in the way that fits them, and not be forced by mummy and daddy or whoever they are to go out and go on a course, you know, like go and do that course and you'll get better. They have to find their way of learning in order to engage in it, in order for it to be received. And I think next generations really have to find their trusted network, because they often don't want the previous generation's trusted network. So that they have to have respect for the information that's coming around them, and it has to be in a format that meets their needs, not what is prescribed to them, because that's patronizing. And I think we tend to do far too much on patronizing the next generation rather than enabling them to learn in the way they need to learn, and then finding out what that is, which is why I think that value proposition, if they could identify where their pain points and friction points are and what the real gains for them would be, then we can make a plan to enable that to happen. So that might be go out and work in another large family business, but preferably that's not related to your sector, that is completely different, so that you can learn lots of different ways of thinking. So I think there's about that. It's about the next generation coming up with what they believe, how they believe they could learn, and then the existing generation almost offering a different way of thinking around it without being prescriptive.
So it's a bespoke development plan in a way, isn't it?
I believe so, because everybody's at a different stage. Everybody has a different skill set and tools. It cannot be one size fits all.
No, that's really good advice. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, and it's slightly tricky, I think, and one of the next gens I spoke to has asked me to ask the question, but a lot of next gen have grown up in successful family firms that have just been, whether either plodding along, but profitable, successful, the heart of their community, and really empowered to continue doing what they're doing. And the pandemic's kind of put a halt to that. And the question I was asked was, how as a next gen can I have conversations when I can see my parents struggling? Emotionally, it's tough, they're working 24 hours, but they're finding it hard to have a conversation, and they're finding it hard to see their parents dealing with a situation that's almost out of their control. What advice would you give to a next gen that's trying to have conversations and help, but doesn't want to put their foot in it and say the wrong thing?
I'm always one for, I mean, everybody's personal family relationship will be different. So again, you can't prescribe the nuances within each family, or the triggers that make people blow. But I'm all for having the conversation as calmly as possible, and it's almost planning that in so that it can come up with practical solutions of how they can help. If I have that, I suppose, to a certain extent. In my sons would say, how can we help with that? Or they might just say to me, well, stop moaning, get on with it. You know what you're doing. They might enable that confidence.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing. You know how to do this. You might just need to think about it in a different way. So it depends on that relationship. Ours is a very open relationship. They will tell me if I'm an idiot quite happily all the time. So if it's that kind of open relationship, it's really having those conversations. And because it's actually been incredibly busy, even though lots of businesses have been in decline, the impact of managing the decline is huge. The time taken in managing your own demise is huge. So actually we have to make time for some of those conversations, and it would be, if we can have a meal together, which it's looking like can't soon, is having a meal together and a conversation just about the business with some food, eating together as a family and saying, right, as a family, what can we now do? And it's making it as calm as possible, so that actually new ideas could land in there. But what if we did this, and how could we do that? And it's kind of it eases the pressure, because as parents, you want to be seen as, we're bringing up our children, we're looking after you. And even if they get into their 30s or 40s, they're still our children. So, parents are supposed to look after the children. And then there's a switch point where actually the children can really look after the parents. It's not because you're getting old and infirm, it's actually because we've got some great new ideas that could actually help in this situation to break it. So for me, it's really about being brave and having the conversation, and maybe having it over a meal or something social, and that would help just unlock some of the thinking, some of the conversations, some of the new ways of doing things. And actually, children can give their parents confidence. If they've really been hit hard, it's very hard to get up. To be resilient, it needs encouragement from the people around you that you love and that you respect. So that the next generations have got that ability to do that, and I think that would help.
So it's they've got a hugely important role to play, haven't they, in terms of driving a business forward and helping. But it's difficult. No one's going to put you can't look at it and say it's all going to be rosy, because there are some difficult decisions that have to be made. But making them, I guess, collectively and as a shared view on the way forward is probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, and I think as families, you kind of think, well, if I've got into the 4th or the 5th generation, my responsibility is not to stuff it up. Well,
and that's a huge thing. I hear that a lot. Is I don't want to be the generation that loses the business. And actually, the pandemic has forced businesses that were on an upward trajectory year on year to finally have a blip in there. And it's no one's fault. The blip has been caused by the pandemic, not by an individual. But there is pressure on a lot of people not to be the one
that didn't manage it effectively. So that's where that collective family can really pull it through and can make some really tough decisions there might be that a whole arm of your business has to go in order to focus on that. And that's why you'd look at that pivoting thing, the innovators, the stickers, and the undecided, and say, well, if I'm in the undecided camp, I need to make some decisions, and those decisions are tough decisions. Based on now what we know, this pandemic is going to rumble on until at least March. I'm not sure that there will be a vaccine, but I don't know. But it might be that we have to manage this across the longer term. So then we make tougher decisions here. And it's remembering that family firms are very capable. They are very capable. And if they're confident, they can be even more capable. And this is where I see the next generations really have that opportunity to say, these are the ideas, this is what I think will work, this is the sort of the business model for it, and take some time on planning a business model. Use the Strategizer's other tool, which is the business model canvas, and really plot out new ideas, really think it through in a business way. And for next gens, they're very cool tools. They're very visual, they're very easy to do, and they help your thinking. So that could be done. And then the decisions become easier, because you're bringing more of the unknowns into knowns. And we're trying to bring as many of the unknowns into knowns as possible. That's all we're ever doing in business. And that's that approach. And that might be an exciting new adventure for a family firm to take. But we've, as generations, not been wedded to doing the same thing. We've started in farming, and we're now in co-working. That is quite a leap across 5 generations. So we're probably flexible in our approach, in that follow the desire of the next generation. What is it that they want to do or see that they can do? And how do we enable that to happen? And that's how I would see it. Where you force a generation to do more of what you did is almost unfair to the next generation.
Really good advice. Really good advice, actually, almost to finish on. I'd just like to add that I watched a small video this morning from Fisk Johnson from SC Johnson, talking about their community program, really, and how the business does lots of stuff within the environment. But actually, part of that purpose was all about creating the world that he wants his daughter to live in after he's not here. Yeah. And again, it was a really lovely piece to listen to. It's on LinkedIn if you want to have a look at it. But it's that thing in terms of the next generation. They have to want to do it. They have to have the ability to do it, and be supported and empowered to do it. So some really good advice there. I think my parting comment would also be that we speak to you and I both speak to a lot of business owners where they will say it's really lonely, and they almost think they're alone and no one else is going through the same thing. And I think the next gen is the same group. There are lots of support networks out there to talk to your peers, and you can learn from what your peers are going through. And I think that's, at the moment, a really good opportunity for the next gen to talk to each other, share ideas, pinch an idea from someone else, because actually they don't own them, and it's an opportunity for you all to learn together. So there are lots of opportunities out there for our next gen.
Everybody should ask themselves, what would I have told myself 6 months ago in the family business? What would I have told myself to do 6 or 7 months ago? And answer that question. And then you think, do it. Make it happen. Do it.
I will take that one stage further then. Write down today what you think the business should be doing, or what you as a next gen should be doing for the next 6 months. And in 6 months' time, just actually see where the world is compared to where you thought it should be, and do it in a forward-thinking way too.
Yeah, exactly. But next gens, get yourself into peer groups. Absolutely. Because you're not on your own with all your challenges, and there's lots of people out there to help. We are not ended. It's all new beginnings.
Jacqui, I have to say, it's been a pleasure listening to you and talking to you this morning, as always. I love the models, I love the thoughts, and I'm sure the next gen have got some things to take away and listen, and maybe talk to their peers around. But really engaging session. Thank you so much for your time, and keep safe and well, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks, Jacqui.